We think we have a handle on the story of inequality in America. But what if the way we even talk about it, the very words we use, are missing the point entirely? We're about to dive into a concept that kind of flips the script on all of that, offering a totally different way to see the architecture of inequality. And honestly, it might just change how you see everything. So let's start with a puzzle. Black Americans make up less than 15% of the US population. They're an even smaller fraction of the low-wage workforce. So why is it that whenever we talk about poverty, the conversation seems to almost inevitably come back to race? The numbers just don't seem to add up, right? Well, the source material we're looking at argues that the answer is a concept you might not have heard of, racecraft. Now, this is super important. This isn't just another word for racism. Racism is the action. Racecraft is the deep down, often unconscious belief system. It's the idea that race is a real, biological thing, a kind of magic that explains social outcomes and really lets us off the hook from asking tougher questions about our economy. To really wrap our heads around this, the source makes a pretty wild comparison: witchcraft. But think about it. Back in 1692 Salem, accusations of witchcraft weren't just random superstition. They were a way to manage a very real social conflict between two different ways of life. The source argues racecraft works the exact same way. It wasn't born out of pure hatred. It came about as a tool to solve a fundamental economic problem, a massive, insatiable need for labor. So, how was this incredibly powerful tool first created? The answer is, well, it's pretty surprising. According to the source, the blueprint for all this wasn't drawn up out of hate, but from something much, much colder: pure economic calculation. Let's go back to the 17th century. Landowners had a huge labor problem. For European immigrants, they came up with indentured servitude, basically a contract with an end date. If you offered better terms, more workers would want to come. Simple. But for Africans who were brought over by force, the math was just brutal and totally different. Why offer freedom? Why offer better terms when, as the source puts it, there was simply no ultimate gain in it for the planter? That single, cold calculation created two completely separate realities. And this, right here, is the moment an economic distinction grew into something monstrous. To justify permanent, inherited bondage, you had to invent a new story. The person who was on free for purely economic reasons had to become, in the collective imagination, a totally different kind of human. This was it. This was the moment a labor solution was set in stone as the foundation for a permanent, race-based caste system. Now, a foundation like that doesn't just sit there, right? It gets built on, layer after layer, for centuries. And what's really incredible is how this system of exclusion has constantly adapted. It keeps changing its form to survive through American history. You can literally trace this story of adaptation across time. When chattel slavery was finally abolished, Jim Crow laws rose from the ashes to basically reproduce the old social order. Later, when the country created these huge programs to build the American middle class, like the New Deal and the GI Bill, Black Americans were just systematically cut out of the deal. And when those barriers finally fell, a war on drugs began, creating a whole new form of control through mass incarceration. It's the same system, just wearing a different mask each time. And the economic fallout from all this? It's undeniable. Just look at this. In 1930, right in the middle of the Great Depression, Black and white unemployment rates were about the same. Everybody was struggling. But you fast forward just 35 years, after decades of being locked out of the nation's biggest wealth-building programs, and the Black unemployment rate was suddenly double the rate for whites. That gap didn't just happen. It was engineered.
This system of control found its most modern and absolutely devastating expression in mass incarceration. The result? By the turn of the 21st century, a staggering 1 in 3 Black men in America would spend time in jail or prison.
Now, to show just how fundamental this logic of control really is, the source material does something really interesting. It pivots to a struggle that seems totally different. It reveals a parallel system, one aimed at a different group, but built on the exact same premise: the denial of a person's autonomy. That system was called coverture. Under this legal doctrine, when a woman got married, her entire civic and legal identity was literally swallowed up by her husband's. She couldn't own property. She couldn't express her own legal views. She couldn't even control her own body. In the eyes of the law, she was covered by her husband. She basically stopped existing as an individual.
And you can see these parallel tracks so clearly in the fight for the most basic right of any citizen, the vote. The 15th Amendment gave black men the right to vote in 1870, a right that was, of course, immediately and violently suppressed, but it still took another 50 years for the 19th Amendment to grant that very same right to women. Two different fights for the same fundamental recognition.
The source argues that these two historical systems cast these really long shadows that still threaten our most fundamental right, the right to bodily integrity. For black men, that legacy continues in the disproportionate danger from police and vigilante violence. And for women, it endures in the threat of sexual assault and the ongoing fights over reproductive autonomy. So this brings us to the final critical question. This framework was invented centuries ago for a very specific economic reason. So why is it still so powerful today? Why does racecraft endure? One big reason it lasts is because it's incredibly flexible. The source points to how, time and again, new immigrant groups like the Irish or Jewish people would arrive poor, and they'd get tossed at the bottom of the ladder, right alongside Black Americans. But as they gained a foothold and some economic power, they were eventually absorbed into the category of white. And this process just reveals the whole game. Race in America has never really been about biology. It's always been a shifting political category tied to power. And the roots of this system have an unbelievably long reach. An economic analysis found something absolutely stunning. The number of enslaved people in a southern county back in 1860 is a direct statistical predictor of the racial resentment of white residents in that exact same county today. A political reality from over 160 years ago is still shaping our present. But beyond all the history and the data, we have to remember that racecraft isn't just some abstract theory. It has a real, profound, and painful human cost. The poet Claudia Rankine just captures this feeling perfectly, that daily weight of being prejudged, of fitting a description you never wrote for yourself. And all of this leaves us with a final, provocative thought. If we accept this idea, that race, as we know it, is an invention, a tool that was crafted to manage economic inequality, then what does that mean for us right now? It suggests that maybe, just maybe, our endless debates about wealth and poverty and justice are all starting in the wrong place, because we've never really confronted the invisible architecture of racecraft itself.